Hi, sixth graders. Today's lesson is all about solving percent problems using proportions. So the first thing that we need to distinguish when we're solving a percent problem is we need to figure out which piece of the problem is missing. So we're either going to be missing the number that represents the part of something, so it's a smaller number than the whole. We might be solving for the whole, which is the larger number or the sum of something that we don't know, or we might be looking for the percent. And the way that we're going to tell which piece we're solving for is you're always going to have two pieces that you know and one piece that you're solving for. So the first thing that we should do is recognize some key information that might help us decide what piece is missing. It says the number after of is almost always the whole. And so I'm just going to underline those key pieces. If it comes after the word of, it is most likely the whole or the large number. And the next clue, the number before is almost always the part. So if it comes before the word is, it is most likely the part or that smaller number. And last but not least, the number with the percent sign is always the percent. If you see the percent sign or if you read the word percent, that's obviously going to be talking about the percent. So knowing those three pieces of information are really helpful. You might even want to pause the video and jot these down really quickly or write them on the notes if you have printed the notes I shared with you. The next thing we need to do before we actually dive in and do some math together is we need to remind ourselves how to set up these proportions correctly in order to solve these types of percent problems. So I have this little trick that I say out loud to myself. Please write percents over 100. This is what I say to myself in my head over and over again. I might even write it down on my piece of paper before I start. Please write percents over 100 as a quick way to remember how to set up your proportions and make sure they're going to work for you. So please starts with the letter P, and that stands in my brain for the word part. So I always put the part on the top of my proportion. So I'm just going to put the letter P here to remind me that the part goes up there. Next, right starts with a W, and that W stands for the word whole, and the whole always goes underneath the part. This kind of makes sense. Generally, we will put the smaller number on top of the larger number when we're writing a fraction. Percents come next. When I'm looking at the ratio on this side of the proportion, percent always goes on the top, and percents are obviously always out of 100. That's what percent means, is per 100. So the 100 always goes in the bottom right-hand corner of my proportion. The other way that you might want to remember this is instead of putting P and W for part and whole, some people like to jot down those key words that we talked about up here. So instead of a part, you might want to put the word is up top. And then if we go back up here, we'll remember as well that whole often comes after the word of. So some people put the word of on the bottom. So instead of part and whole, P and W, they might write is and of, and it could be helpful. The right side of your proportion should always be percents over 100. Again, you might want to pause this and kind of take some time and jot these things down before we get started, or go to the document I shared with you and print this off so you have it. Now it's time to do these 4 practice problems. So number 1 says, what is 20% of 40? The first thing I like to do is find the numbers that I do know. I know that 20 is a percent. I can even label that with a little percent sign if it helps me. The next number I know is a 40. I'm also going to underline that 40 with the word of, because we just went over some keywords, and of is a key word that tells me that whatever comes after that is generally the whole. So I know that this 40 is that whole number, that larger number in my relationship. And then it's asking me to find what is 20% of 40. And that keyword is tells me that I am missing the part. I always like to set up my proportion and get it ready to go, and I always know that my 100 goes in the bottom right-hand side. Before I dive in, if it's helpful, you can also write maybe up in the corner of your notes, please write percents over 100, just so you always have that there and you can always view it to help you on the rest of the page. So I'm going to look at what I know. I know that 20 is the percent, so it's obviously going to go 20% over the 100. And since 40 is my whole, the 40 is going to go on the bottom of this side. Next, I'm going to draw my arrows. If you remember back to a previous lesson on proportions, when we're solving for a missing piece, I like to draw arrows and I like them to land where I'm actually trying to solve for a missing piece. So I'm going to look for a relationship between 100 and 40. And right away, I notice that I don't have anything that works really friendly between 100 and a 40 with a multiplication or division fact. So I'm going to look at this fraction before I go any further. I'm going to see, can I simplify it? Can I make those numbers easier to work with? I notice that 20 and 100 both have a 10 fact. So I can do 20 divided by 10 and get 2. The easiest way for me to do that is just cross off that 0. And when I do the same thing on the bottom, 100 divided by 10 is 10. The easiest way to do that is cross off that 0. So I haven't changed that fraction. I've just made it an equivalent fraction. So it's still worth the same amount. It's got the same relationship, but now these numbers are just easier to work with. So getting from 10 to 40, I know that that is a multiply by 4 relationship. And if I do that to the bottom, I need to multiply by 4 on top. And I'm going to get that 2 times 4 is 8. I'm going to circle that. That's what I solved. So if I go back to my problem, it says, what is 20% of 40? And my answer is, the missing piece was 8. Number 2 asks, 12 is what percent of 60? So I'm going to underline the pieces that I know in this one. 12 is, I know that the keyword is usually means it's a part, so I'm just going to label that with the letter P. Of 60, of usually means the whole, so I'm going to label that with a W, and it's asking me what is the percent, so the percent is what is missing. It's also pretty obvious in this one because I don't see any number with a percent sign. So I'm going to set up my proportion again. My 100 always goes in the bottom right hand corner. Please write percent over 100 is right here to remind me. If 12 is my part, it must go on the top over on the left side. My whole was 60, it goes on the bottom on the left side. And if you were confused, your common sense can help you on this one. 12 is smaller than 60, so 60's got to be the whole, it's larger, and 12 must be the part because it's smaller. So I'm going to draw my arrows. And once again, I realize that they gave us numbers that aren't friendly the way they gave them to us. So I've got to simplify 12 and 60. I see that there is a 12 fact. So I'm going to divide by 12 on the top. I'm also going to divide by 12 on the bottom, and over here I'm going to get an equivalent fraction. 12 divided by 12 is 1, much simpler than a 12, and 60 divided by 12 is 5, again, much simpler than that 60. I also like to just cross off the old fraction just so I don't accidentally use numbers that aren't friendly. When I extend these arrows, I should hopefully have gotten numbers that work well together. To get from 5 to 100, I do know there's a math fact that works, and it's times 20. Now, if I multiply by 20 on the bottom, I'm going to multiply by 20 on the top, and 1 times 20 is 20%, which is the missing piece. So 12 is what percent of 60? My answer is, it was 20%. Okay, number 3 says 16 is 40% of what number? So I'm going to underline 16 is. I know that that's the part. I'm going to label that with the letter P. 40%, obviously it's the percent. It's got a percent sign right there. And of what? That means it's my whole that is missing. I'm going to set up my proportion over here. 100 always goes in the bottom right hand side. My part is 16, so it must go on the top over here. And 40% goes over the 100. I'm going to draw my arrows. Okay. Does 40 work with 16 in a friendly way? I don't think so, so I'm going to simplify this fraction. I see 10 facts again. So 40 divided by 10 is 4. I cross off that 0. 100 divided by 10 is 10. I'm going to cross off that 0. 4 times 4 gets me to 16. So I'm going to do the same thing on the bottom. And 10 times 4 is 40. So 16 is 40% of what number? That large whole number that I was searching for was 40. And I can circle my answer over here. Last but not least, we're going to quickly practice what it's like to do a proportion to solve a percent word problem. What you often notice in word problems is that they're missing these key words. They might be missing is or of because word problems generally state things in different ways. They use different words because they're describing a real life situation. So number 4 says the 30 students in Mr. Boyer's class vote on their favorite animal. 40% like pigs. How many students like pigs? So first I'm going to look at what I do know. I know that there are 30 students in the class. I know that has to be the whole class, so I'm just going to write a W right away. It told me there's 30 students in class. That's not going to be the part that vote for pigs. That's the whole class. I guarantee you they're not all going to pick pigs. We know that 40% of them do like pigs, so there's my percent. Pretty logical. And then it says how many students like pigs. So how many students like pigs? That's only going to be part of the class. I'm going to put a little letter P down here. If I set up my proportion with my 100 in the bottom right hand corner, as usual, 40% goes over 100. And then my 30 students, because it was my whole class, it goes down here on the bottom. If I'm trying to get from 100 to 30, I realize that it doesn't work. So I need to simplify. If I simplify 40 hundredths, I can divide by 10 and turn it into 4 tenths. And I notice that 10 does work with 30. So I'm going to multiply by 3. If I multiply by 3 on the top, 4 times 3 is 12. So my answer is that 12 students liked pigs. Hopefully that helped remind you how to solve percent problems. We want to figure out what piece is missing, and then we set up our proportions. So remember, when you go to practice your problems, please write percents over 100.